Hello, I think we're on, although my phone is telling me that I have a poor connection, which is quite annoying. So fingers crossed this holds up. I think I'm going to have to do some more work on my technology or go somewhere nice like the beach to do my Facebook Lives. Either way, we'll get here, we'll make it, not to worry. So I hope you can hear me all right. Today we're going to talk about letting the horse bucket out, as we say when we first put the saddle on. I talked about this a little bit yesterday about horses having a really bad first saddling experience, and I said that if they have a really bad first saddling experience they might end up with post-traumatic stress disorder, and we discussed that a bit yesterday. I don't think that's necessarily the case, and I'll talk about how the two are different at the end of this session, but it can be the case. So I think first saddling is, it's such an important thing, and we often don't give the horse the chance to really get to understand the saddle, and therefore the horse is always at a disadvantage really for the rest of its riding career because this isn't properly explained. So let me just briefly talk about why people think the horse should bucket out when the saddle is put on. And this is a bit like, where when people say, I need somebody to ride through it. So if a horse is behaving badly, if a horse is bucking or something, you get somebody who you think is a better rider and they ride through the nonsense or ride through the difficulties or ride through the naughty behaviour. And it's some sort of idea that you can push or muscle this horse through this, whereas you might as well hang on, step back and say, why don't I educate the horse through this rather than trying to push it through it. So I think the things are two really similar things, but we'll just talk about the reasons why people do think that they should let the horse bucket out when they first saddle it. And I hear a lot of things. One of the ones, which is the most common reason, is that so the horse understands that it can't get the saddle off. And well, I suppose that's important. And another one is so the horse understands that bucking doesn't help. So it can buck until it's blue in the face, and quite often does, but nothing changes. The saddle is still there. So that's sort of, it can't get it off as well. A lot of people think, and although not many people voice this, but they want the horse a little bit tired. So before they do too much with the horse and start properly habituating the horse to the saddle, if they let it bucket out and it runs, 27 times around the round pen, then it's a little bit tired, so it's going to be easier to deal with. That's also a really common thing with people lunging their horses, but that's a topic for another conversation. To understand that it can move wearing a restrictive saddle. So sometimes when you first girth the horse up, that's quite surprising for the horse. And they stand terribly still. So it's a good thing. They feel that the horse understands that it can move when it's got the saddle on. And to also understand that the saddle won't hurt the horse. So it can move, it can buck, it can do whatever it likes, and it's not going to get hurt. I'd argue whether that is actually the case. And also it looks impressive, doesn't it, to have the horse running around bucking like a lunatic. I gave you two links at the top of this post, or underneath this post. The first one is to Stallion, and the first time I've saddled him. It's not the first time he's been saddled, and you'll know that because it does buck like a bronco, and if it was the first time it had ever been saddled, it shouldn't behave like that. Now, I bought this stallion knowing full well that it bucked, and I was told by the previous owner before I bought it that the horse had bucked off a girthed up saddle. Now there's a horse that can buck, or somebody that can't do a saddle up. So I knew that it had this history. What I probably didn't realise until I put the saddle on it and let it go was that it was an immediate reaction. Like it was a reaction from actually being saddled. So it's a really interesting video, and you'll see what that horse does. The saddle goes on, he walks off, and then he just absolutely explodes. And I was actually riding that horse about 10 or 15 minutes after that initial explosion. I couldn't put that on YouTube because somebody stupid wasn't wearing a helmet, and that's just really stupid. So sadly, that's not on YouTube. But the next video I gave you is the same horse on its third ride in the arena. Again, I'm not wearing a helmet because I'm an idiot. But we'll talk a little bit more about what happened on that third ride. The horse looks quite good, but it's not grand. So it does look impressive, and I'm actually writing a paper at the moment on the problems with round pen work, lunging and high-speed liberty work, and there are good and bad things about all of these, but I'm writing a paper on the problems with them. And one of the things I do discuss in there is the sort of the way of the horse competitions, or in America, the road to the horse competitions. And the problem with that is that it's entertainment. So this bucking it out is something you quite often see in those competitions. And they are all about entertainment. It's designed for a large audience, and you've got to give them something to keep them amused. So somebody once said to me that horse training should be boring to watch. And I think if your horse training is boring to watch, you're probably on the right track. So those are some reasons why people do it, and those are some reasons people give me for doing it. So let's talk a little bit about the reasons why you shouldn't do it. When a horse starts to buck like that, it can really easily hit the panels. If you've got a nice big round pen like the horse in the video is using, it's very easy for the horse to hit the panels. And in fact I used to always let them go loose when I first put the saddle on, because you never know, there might be a buck in there somewhere, there might be. Now I keep them actually on a lunge line so that they don't get too close to the panels, just in case they buck. 80% of the horses I start don't buck, but just in case they do, I don't want them to hit the panels, because once the horse has been hurt, it's game over. You've got no horse then, or if you do have a horse, maybe it doesn't really hurt himself, but he's still going to have been surprised by that, and it's still an addition to your training that you didn't want. You've now hurt the horse. That changes the game completely. The worst thing that could happen, of course, is that the horse gets out. So if you haven't got a nice strong round pen like the one in the video, perhaps you're in a paddock, perhaps you've got a round pen made of tyres, as some people use, and the horse escapes, then it's out in the world, and the potential is huge that the horse could hurt itself. Hello, Michelle. Nice to see you. There's also a real possibility that the horse will damage its back muscles. You can see the horse on the video is using a lot of energy, and actually that horse, I did have it examined after the third ride, which I'll talk about in a minute, which went well at the beginning, didn't go so well after I got off the horse. What had happened with that horse when it had been started, which was about a year before I got it, it had torn all the muscles in its back under the saddle. So this was a really uncomfortable thing for the horse. So that must have been horribly painful for that horse for a long time. So that's a real possibility. The horse could also fall over. A lot of them just aren't that agile. There's a real possibility that the horse could badly injure itself doing that. The behaviour could also become habitual. So that's probably the thing really that we should be worrying about, is that if you let the horse repeat something once even, and maybe more than once, if you always put the horse's saddle on, like for the first 5 times you ride, perhaps, for example, pop the saddle on, run it around the round pen 3 or 4 times, let it buck, then get on it. What happens when you can't run it around the round pen, or when you don't want to run it around the round pen anymore? That bucking behaviour has become part of your pattern. So the horse has the habit now of bucking before you get on. The horse has a habit of bucking as soon as the saddle goes on. So you've taught that. It's a learned behaviour, you've taught it. And it will be quite hard to unteach that. Probably the most important thing to think about is flight. So the horse, when it runs and bucks like that, is in flight mode. It's trying to run away from the saddle. a horse gets release when it's in flight mode. So it gets a successful release, which means that it's something that the horse is learning to do. So what you've done really is introduce flight as a possible response, really, to anything. Because when the horse goes, because it is allowed to get away, because you're not holding on to it, it is successful in its flight, it then becomes a possibility. So every time you introduce something new, you've got to think, I did introduce that flight thing. I wonder if it's going to do that now. Whereas if you could perhaps ask the horse to stand still or do something constructive with the horse, then that will become your possible response to the new behavior, the new cue next time. So it's important that you don't introduce flight. You really, I would do it as little as possible, encouraging the horse to move away from you. It's a great motivator because it happens really quickly and the horse gets an immediately release because it leaves the situation. And that can, of course, if the horse then gets hurt, that can, of course, lead to the post-traumatic stress that we were talking about last time. Just teaching the behaviour, teaching the horse to buck after it's saddled is not the same as a horse that's got post-traumatic stress from getting terribly badly injured and traumatised by this letting them buck it out for a saddling experience. So back to the stallion that I've given you the videos of, that first time, that was a learned behaviour. That stallion had learned when the saddle goes on, I buck like a lunatic, then I stand still. So then I could ride him. I got off, I've had a 3-minute ride, I got off, it was fine. The next time, so I had 2 more rides on him, and then the third one is the second video that I gave you the link to. And I had a great 10-minute ride on the horse, absolutely brilliant. I then got off, and I had a photographer there, and I said, I'll do a bit of canter work, and I'll get back on again, do some canter, and then we'll put him away. Anyway, I got back on, and my seat had hardly touched the saddle, and he just bucked me straight off. And so that was when I went and got him seen by a physiotherapist who said that he had these terrible torn muscles down his back. And she thought what had happened was that he'd warmed his muscles up. So I'd long lined him first, and probably in the first instance with his bucking thing, he'd warmed his muscles up. And when I got off him and let him stand for 5 minutes and then got back on, he'd cooled off and then it hurt again. So I ended up giving him 6 months off and a lot of treatment. And at the end of the day, I brought him back. At the end of that 6 months, I brought him back in. The first time I rode him, he was absolutely fine for about 15 minutes, which is all I rode for. The next time, he was fine for about 10. The next time, he was fine for about 5. Now, he never did buck again, but he made it very clear to me that he was going to. I could feel his back lifting up and, all of this sort of thing. So for me, it was a very well-learned behaviour. The horse wasn't stressing. It wasn't a post-traumatic stress thing that would be really hard to get over. It was just a really well-learned behaviour that needed to be untrained and retrained with something more useful, which is, quite a big job. Yeah. So I think the thing to remember is that we are teaching all the time. So it doesn't matter whether your horse is in the round pen loose and working things out for itself. We're still teaching it. We're still training something. So if you get somebody to ride through the bucking for you, then you're still training the horse. And just because they're a better rider than you are, doesn't mean the horse is learning not to buck at all. So because the horse repeats what it practices, but it repeats the behaviour that's reinforced. So, we'll talk another time a little bit about, if you're interested, is about the difference between reinforcement and punishment. The horse repeats behaviour that is reinforced. So that might be negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement. So the negative reinforcement is the release of pressure. And by reinforcing a behaviour, you make it more likely to occur in the future. So the bucking works well for this, especially under saddle. It's reinforced because the rider falls off. Usually I certainly do. I fall off after one buck. I'm hopeless. Would never have made a rodeo rider. So the horse is reinforced for that behaviour, so it's likely to occur again. Positive reinforcement is where you add something rather than take it away. With negative reinforcement, we took away the pressure. Positive reinforcement, you're adding something, and you might add, let's say you add food. So, if you want the horse to put its head down, for example, the horse puts its head down, you give it some food, and that's positively reinforced, and it makes the behaviour, the head, put your head down behaviour, more likely to occur next time because the horse is going to expect food. The other side of the coin is the punishment. Positive punishment adds something. So it's the same as positive reinforcement. We added something. So positive punishment will be adding something. So we might add the whip. So the horse bucks, we hit it with the whip. That happens after the behaviour. So we add something after the behaviour we don't want, and it makes the behaviour less likely to occur again, or so learning theory will tell you. And with that, it's a difficult thing to use because your timing has to be brilliant. If the horse has bucked you off, there's no point in getting yourself up and dusting yourself off and then going and catching the horse and then walloping it with the whip, because for far as the horse is concerned, it's already done the right thing and been reinforced for that behaviour, minutes ago, probably. But if it's more than 3 seconds, it's unlikely to have any relation to the behaviour for the horse. And then there's negative punishment, which is taking something away. And this is rarely successful with horses, but there's some examples of where people try and use negative punishment is when the horse, let's say the horse bucks, because that's what we're talking about, and they decide that they'll go and tie it to the tree of knowledge. This is something I hear a lot, which basically means putting it in social isolation. So it's taking away its company and its freedom to move and all of those basic things that the horse should be allowed to do. And they tie it up to the tree for, I don't know, however long they think is due. And it's a pretty awful thing to do, but it's a very common thing to do. And that's negative punishment, so taking something away. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for now, for today, and thank you for joining me. Do go and watch those 2 videos. If you have a question, tomorrow is Throwback Thursday, so throw a question at me, and I will see you then. Thank you. Bye.